Gabby, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate this introduction, and more than anything, I am grateful that you allow me to play with you guys at Center for Common Ground, because this work that they are doing is the real deal. They make it happen. And so many of us who have been in this space for many years, we rely on our volunteers and our grassroots members. But what I love is this idea of connecting the technology to help these voters who may have digital divide issues by virtue of using your cell phone, for example, doing texting. It's alternative ways of improving their access to the vote. So welcome to day 2. To our Reclaim Our Vote Grassroots Summit series. And again, to those of you who joined us yesterday, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. And those newbies who have just joined us, thank you for doing so. We really appreciate it. I just want to recognize, before we get really rolling on voting, it's just what a difficult time we're going through. And I also want to raise up how important it is that we stay focused in our effort to keep our democracy strong. If we've seen anything in the just over this weekend, is just how insane it is. You know, and like I said yesterday, when we first envisioned this event 2 months ago, we were still in the very early throes of COVID-19. And with alarm, as the same as with all of you, we watched how quickly the infection numbers and the deaths were adding up. But at that time, the focus was still bi-coastal. It was still about California and Washington and New York and the tragedy there, and New Jersey and Massachusetts. Primaries were also in full swing, and it was clear that voting in person was going to be problematic. And what we saw is state after state started to re-examine or examine their process, maybe for the first time even. And some states like mine in Maryland, no problem, we delayed our vote, we delayed our primaries, and the governor just sent everybody ballots by mail. But some, like Wisconsin, pushed forward and forced people to go to the polls in person and stood in line, and so many became ill. So obviously this is something we still will have to think about in November. So fast forward to today, and what are we seeing? There are over 103,000 dead. The economy is tanking. Maybe the stock market is doing well, but the rest of it, not so great. Unemployment through the roof. And sadly, what's upsetting and will concern us is that we're going to start witnessing the displacement of people, particularly renters, as they lose their home, which will have an impact on their voting status, and maybe even their desire to go to the polls. So to move the economy along, what have we seen? States are now reopening, yet there's still little guidance on the most appropriate way to do so. There's still no widely available tests, and where there are tests, there are still some discrepancies. So we're not really sure if the data is accurate. PPE is still lacking in many hospitals, and since reopening started, now we have new hotspots in places where we work: North Carolina, Alabama, Virginia, Iowa, Wisconsin, Arkansas. We're also seeing select rural spaces in California, like Sonoma. Rural areas and smaller metropolises are now beginning to be hit harder. I think that's going to continue and progress if what we've witnessed in our own states is any evidence. Racism has sprung out of the closet. In the last few weeks, we have witnessed 3 horrible and needless murders: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And because of their deaths and how poorly it was handled by the authorities, Friday night, the country exploded. It exploded again yesterday. There have been riots and protests recorded in at least 30 cities that I am up to snuff on across the country. And now I think what we're also seeing is that there is more confusion and violence, as allegedly outsiders are starting to drive into these states to create additional harm. So I don't mean to sound like a worrywart, but when I think about voting, what if we start seeing outside agitators trying to create more confusion in that situation as well? So people's nerves are fraying. You know, to quote Martin Luther King, riots don't develop out of thin air. What he knew, and we see today, is that as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the condition of having riots over and over again. And these conditions must be condemned as rigorously as the riots themselves. What that tells us is that social justice and full, meaningful enfranchisement equals riot prevention. We also know that when something is burned down or destroyed, we have to build it back again, and something will replace it, right? Vacuums are always must be filled. So the question is, for all of us, what are we going to fill this with? How do we turn this horrible moment in history into something positive, an opportunity for a better democracy, a stronger, a more just and equitable society? As this is a nation, we need a do-over. The only way we're going to get that do-over is with an election. And that's why we're doing this today, to ensure that the process is free and fair. So yesterday, we discussed the what of the current historical moment, what is happening, what we need to understand in the big picture. Today, we're going to discuss more of the how. And once again, we're going to try to answer the hard questions. Can we as citizens stand up and fight back? And that big question, how do we do so? How do we reclaim our vote to strengthen our democracy? And let's not forget, once we do show up and let's say our candidates get elected, that's just the first step. We still face an uphill climb. Damage to repair is no longer just a physical damage. It requires a real shift in culture. And, beginning to accept that that's where we're headed.